The morning the money died did not arrive with a warning. It came quietly, like a predator already inside the house. People in Weimar Germany woke up believing they still lived in a functioning nation, only to discover, before noon, that the value of their wages had slipped through their fingers like sand. By sunset, it was gone entirely. The first sign was always the bread. A loaf that cost 250 marks last week now cost 20,000. By the afternoon, it would be 50,000. By evening, who knew? A price wasn't a number anymore, it was a countdown. Every minute was decay. You could see it in the faces on the streets, that stunned expression people wear when they realize the world has broken at a fundamental level. Not cracked, broken. You could hear it in the frantic scraping of chalk on shop windows, where clerks updated prices again, and again, and again. A grotesque ritual repeated until their hands cramped. The inflation wasn't rising, it was devouring. Children pushed wheelbarrows overflowing with banknotes, notes so worthless they spilled like confetti onto the cobblestone streets. Crowds didn't bother picking them up, it wasn't worth the effort. Beggars stepped over bundles of cash the way one steps over fallen leaves. Elderly men burned stacks of banknotes in iron stoves because firewood was too expensive. And in the factories, workers demanded to be paid twice a day, knowing that if they waited until sunset, their wages would buy nothing but regret. Money had transformed from a tool of life into a symbol of futility. A piece of paper that once held promise now held humiliation. In the markets, people no longer asked, "How much does it cost?" They asked something darker. "How fast can I buy it before the price changes again?" Every purchase was a race against collapse. Every delay was a loss. Every transaction was soaked in panic. There were scenes that looked like hallucinations. A butcher refusing to take cash because it was more profitable to sell the paper by weight. A seamstress trading dresses for potatoes. A professor offering all his savings, an entire lifetime of discipline, for a single sack of coal. Entire professions evaporated because paper money, their oxygen, no longer sustained anything. For centuries, societies had feared famine, war, plague. But Weimar revealed a more silent horror, the death of trust. When the currency that binds a nation turns to dust, the social contract dissolves. People stop believing in tomorrow. They stop believing in each other. The newspapers that week were filled with headlines that felt like satire. Prices rise again. Mark hits new low. Economy stable, say officials. Stability? The numbers on the front page were climbing vertically like a rocket launched straight into madness. Every statistic was a confession of failure. Every government assurance was a joke no one laughed at. And beneath all of this was a deeper dread, an unspoken terror that everyone sensed, but no one dared articulate out loud. If the money meant nothing, what did anything mean? In cafes, people whispered theories. Some blamed the war. Some blamed foreign powers. Some blamed politicians. But the majority didn't care about reason anymore. When survival becomes mathematical, how many notes will I need by noon? How many by evening? Philosophy dies. What replaced it was something colder, something primal. Bartering returned like a ghost from the Middle Ages. Chickens became more valuable than briefcases stuffed with currency. Silverware, heirlooms, boots, soap, objects with weight, with substance, regained power. People rediscovered value the hard way, through scarcity, through reality, through the unforgiving truth that paper without trust is only pulp. By the end of the month, families sat in dark apartments, surrounded by worthless money stacked in corners like tombstones. They listened to the distant hum of printing presses, machines working without rest, pumping out more notes, more zeros, more denial. Each new sheet of currency was another shovel of dirt thrown onto the coffin of the nation. The nightmare had no climax. It simply deepened day by day until the abnormal became normal. Until mothers no longer gasped at the price of milk. Until fathers stopped checking their wages. Until the country collectively accepted the unthinkable. Germany had not merely lost control of its currency, it had lost control of reality. The day money died was not a date in history books. It was a feeling, a cold realization spreading through an entire people at the same time. We are falling, and there is nothing to hold on to. And that was only the beginning. Empires don't collapse in a single night. They unravel through a pattern so old, so familiar, that history barely bothers to disguise it anymore. Weimar's nightmare wasn't an accident or a surprise, at least not to anyone who understands the oldest trick in the playbook of failing powers. Inflate, default, reset. The pattern begins quietly, with debt, always debt. Governments promise prosperity, security, victory, recovery, whatever the moment demands. The cost doesn't matter because the bill is pushed into the future, buried under signatures, bonds, patriotic slogans. At first, the debt seems manageable, then necessary, then inevitable, then terminal. Rome learned this the hard way. When its treasury drained, emperors shaved the silver content from the denarius, stretching value the way a desperate gambler stretches truth. Coins became lighter, duller, fraudulent. Confidence crumbled, prices surged, and Rome, once invincible, began feeding on its own currency, like a wounded animal eating its own flesh just to stay alive. Centuries later, revolutionary France printed assignats, paper supposedly backed by confiscated church lands. They called it innovation. They called it progress. They called it salvation. Until markets realized the land wasn't enough to justify the endless issuance. Value evaporated. Hyperinflation exploded. Paris starved. And the same government that printed the money ended up executing those who objected to it. Weimar was simply the next chapter in a recurring script. When a state is drowning in debt, it has only three choices: raise taxes, cut spending, or destroy the currency. The first two are politically fatal. The third is politically convenient. So Weimar chose the third. The government didn't announce, "We are wiping out your savings." They didn't have to. They just printed, and printed, and printed. The people saw banknotes, but what they were really seeing was silent taxation, wealth ripped from their pockets without a vote, without a law, without a declaration. Inflation is the perfect crime, invisible, deniable, devastating. And the pattern is always the same. Step 1, a crisis demands money. Step 2, politicians refuse pain and choose the printing press. Step 3, citizens lose faith. Step 4, the currency dies. Step 5, a new system rises from the ashes, controlled by the very elites who engineered the collapse. Every step is disguised as rescue. Weimar citizens believed their government was protecting them from starvation and foreign debt. But the numbers told a different story. Prices rose faster than wages. Savings shrank faster than hope. And the more the government printed, the worse the problem became. Yet every solution proposed involved more printing. The pattern fed on itself. Each week, more zeros were added to banknotes. Each month, new denominations were introduced. Each year, the distance between wealth and poverty widened. Those who understood what was happening, those who held gold, land, factories, goods, prospered amid the chaos. Everyone else sank. But these aren't Weimar problems. They're human problems, symptoms of a deeper truth repeated across civilizations. When rulers can manipulate the currency, they eventually will. When they do, collapse follows. The Roman denarius, the French assignat, the Weimar mark, each destroyed not by enemies, but by the hands meant to protect them. This is the pattern. A nation borrows, a crisis hits, leaders panic, the printing press awakens, trust erodes, prices explode, society cracks, and when the dust settles, the elites unveil a new monetary order, clean, efficient, controlled. The people think they've been saved, but in reality, they've been reset. History doesn't repeat because we forget. It repeats because the incentives never change. And Weimar was not the first victim. It would not be the last. We like to imagine Weimar as a relic, an artifact sealed safely behind the glass of history. But the truth is far more unsettling. The Weimar nightmare didn't disappear. It simply learned to wear modern clothes. And if you listen carefully, you can hear its footsteps again. The parallels don't begin with catastrophe, they begin with comfort. In Weimar, the printing press was justified as temporary relief, emergency measures, a bridge to stability. Today, the words are different: quantitative easing, liquidity support, stimulus. But the logic is identical. Crisis demands money. More money demands justification. And justification demands that the public stays calm, obedient, hopeful. Debt becomes background noise. Printing becomes routine. Markets celebrate the very policies that corrode their foundations. And a society that believes it can paper over its problems begins drifting toward a familiar cliff, just like Weimar did. The numbers today look different, but the shape of the curve is hauntingly the same. Upward, vertical, accelerating. Nations borrow trillions as casually as a family ordering breakfast. Central banks promise they can unwind their balance sheets whenever they choose. Politicians insist the system is stable, controlled, sophisticated. But Weimar's leaders said the same. Back then, newspapers reassured the public with headlines declaring optimism and recovery, right up until the moment prices multiplied by thousands in a single year. Today, financial analysts debate inflation targets and interest rate pivots, while ignoring the deeper truth. Once a government becomes dependent on cheap money, it cannot stop. It will not stop. The printing press is not a tool, it is a trap, and every trap has victims. In Weimar, the middle class evaporated almost overnight. Savings, decades of sacrifice, turned to ash. Today, people watch housing prices escape gravity, groceries double in cost, and wages stagnate while assets inflate beyond reach. They sense something is wrong. They can't prove it. They can't name it. But they feel the same quiet unease the Germans felt in 1922, when life still looked normal, but reality was already splitting beneath the surface. Then there's the speed. Weimar did not collapse slowly. It drifted for years, then snapped in months. Inflation moved from irritation to crisis to catastrophe with terrifying velocity. Confidence doesn't erode, it vanishes. One day people trust the system, the next day they run from it. Look around. Trust is thinning. Institutions strain under pressure. Nations accumulate debt faster than they produce value. And the public, increasingly aware yet strangely powerless, senses that the story is repeating. There is another parallel, one darker than the numbers. In Weimar, those who understood the game bought assets, factories, farms, precious metals, real estate. When the mark died, they didn't. In fact, they emerged stronger. Today, the same dynamic unfolds. Wealth migrates upward, toward those who own the tangible. Meanwhile, everyone else holds currency, an IOU from a system drowning in its own promises. The divide grows, resentment builds, and history whispers, this is how societies fracture. But perhaps the most chilling parallel is psychological. Weimar citizens didn't believe collapse was possible until it was already happening. They trusted experts. They trusted institutions. They trusted the belief that modern nations don't fail the way ancient ones did. Today we repeat the same mantra. We tell ourselves our systems are too advanced, too regulated, too smart to explode. But complexity doesn't prevent crisis, it hides it. And denial doesn't stop collapse, it accelerates it. Weimar isn't a ghost, it's a mirror. And when we look closely, past the screens, past the charts, past the comforting narratives, we see our own reflection staring back, fragile and uncertain. History is not warning us, it is reminding us. The same incentives, the same illusions, the same arrogance, the same machinery of debt and denial humming beneath the surface. Weimar didn't end because people understood what was happening. It ended because they didn't, until it was far too late. And now, the parallel tightens, the pattern sharpens, the echo grows louder. Not a repetition, a reawakening. Collapse never arrives alone. It is summoned, engineered, constructed by hands that move quietly behind curtains while the public stares at the stage. Weimar was not merely an economic tragedy, it was an orchestration. A reset designed in boardrooms, ministries, and smoke-filled offices where power spoke in whispers and the nation's fate was traded like a commodity. Because when money dies, someone always profits. And in Weimar, the winners were not the people pulling wheelbarrows of cash through the streets. They were the ones who never touched the money at all. The industrialists, the financiers, the political architects who understood early that the mark was doomed and positioned themselves above the flames. They knew the secret rule of hyperinflation. When currency collapses, assets rise. Land survives. Factories survive. Gold survives. Political influence not only survives, it expands. So while the public watched their wages evaporate, a small circle of elites acquired everything that was once out of reach. Entire companies were sold for the price of a single afternoon's inflation. Farmland, mines, shipping fleets, apartment blocks. Generational wealth transferred in a frenzy of desperation. What took families a century to build changed hands in minutes. These buyers weren't lucky. They were prepared. They had access to foreign currency accounts, fixed assets, insider information, and political protection. They didn't need to outrun the fire. They helped light it, then stepped back as everyone else burned. Meanwhile, the government and central bank played their own role. Officials insisted printing more money was the responsible solution. They blamed foreign reparations, speculators, hostile nations, anyone but themselves. But the truth was simpler. Inflation erased government debt, and the faster the mark collapsed, the easier it became for the state to wipe its obligations clean. Hyperinflation wasn't a failure of policy. It was a strategy of survival. Every new banknote was a silent confession. Every press run was an admission that the system was beyond saving, but could still be exploited. And while the printing presses roared through the night, the political class hardened its grip. New emergency powers were granted. New controls were introduced. New narratives justified everything. A nation in chaos is a playground for those who understand how power shifts. And as ordinary Germans bartered furniture for food and burned money to stay warm, a new ruling structure emerged, one that blended industry, finance, and government into a single engine of control. Crisis became leverage. Collapse became opportunity. The suffering of millions became the foundation for a new elite order. But the darkest truth is this. Weimar didn't create these actors. It revealed them. It peeled away the illusions of democracy and fairness, exposing a hierarchy that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to expand. The architects of collapse didn't watch passively. They directed, they benefited, they evolved. And when the mark finally died, they were the ones standing atop the ruins, ready to shape the next era, with more wealth, more influence, and more control than ever before. This is the revelation hidden beneath the numbers, beneath the chaos, beneath the historical footnotes. Money is only the first thing to fall. Power is the last. The public lost everything. But the architects, they gained a nation. When a currency collapses, it doesn't only destroy wealth, it destroys certainty. It strips a society down to its bones and forces a reckoning with the most uncomfortable question a civilization can face. What is value when the symbol of value dies? Weimar discovered that answer the hard way. When the mark turned to ash, people realized that money had never been the foundation. Trust was. Trust in institutions, trust in stability, trust that tomorrow would resemble today. And when that trust dissolved, the country fractured into 1,000 private battles for survival. But something else emerged in the ruins. Something fierce, undeniable, and often forgotten. The people who endured were not the wealthiest. They were the most prepared. Those who survived held what inflation couldn't burn: land, skills, food stores, tools, hard assets, relationships, community. Those who thrived held something even rarer: the ability to see the end coming before the crowd did. Weimar ended with a reset, the Rentenmark, the restructuring of power, the consolidation of wealth. A new order rose from the ashes, promising stability at a cost. More control, fewer freedoms, a society willing to trade autonomy for security. The people accepted it. They were exhausted, defeated, desperate for normalcy. But the lesson was never about the currency. It was about the consequence of forgetting that money is a story, and stories can be rewritten overnight. Today, the world stands on a fault line that feels unsettlingly familiar. Debt soaring beyond reason, inflation flickering unpredictably, governments insisting everything is under control, people sensing that something is unraveling beneath the surface. The parallel isn't perfect. History never repeats with the same handwriting. But the rhythm is the same. The incentives are the same. The warning signs are the same. And so is the choice. Weimar teaches one final truth, the truth no textbook dares to highlight. Collapse is not sudden. It is visible long before it strikes, but only to those who choose to look. The inevitability is not doom, it is awareness. The inevitability is not collapse, it is preparation. The inevitability is not despair, it is clarity. Because when a society's money dies, what replaces it is never random. A new system emerges, shaped by those who understand what value truly is. And the individuals who survive are always the ones who refuse to outsource their security to institutions that have every incentive to lie. Weimar was a warning, not a prophecy. It showed us that when trust erodes, nations fall, but people endure. It showed us that when currency fails, reality returns. It showed us that the final reserve currency is not gold or land or assets. It is knowledge, the ability to see through illusion before illusion becomes catastrophe. So the real question isn't whether another Weimar can happen. It's whether we recognize the patterns early enough to choose differently. In the end, every nation faces a moment when it must decide what its currency and its future is built on. And every individual faces the same moment. Money can die, systems can collapse, but the people who see the storm forming can step aside before the flood arrives. Because inevitability is not fate, it is a warning light, one that only matters if we dare to stare into the darkness and walk forward anyway.